as you've been doing all day, another massive round of applause, please. It's Imran Afzal.
Hi everyone, really happy to be here, and Phil, thanks for the introduction. This is the first time that I've done the last slot at a conference. I've never done this before, and it feels exciting, it feels great, also feels a little bit daunting. It feels exciting because I've never done this before, and I always think it's good to learn from new experiences and hopefully apply what you learn into future experiences. It's slightly daunting because I feel like we're overrunning a little bit and I'm the person standing between you and a drink at the social. But let's see if I can keep you entertained and engaged over the next 45 minutes or so. So as Phil said, I'm Imran. I work at Co-op as a principal designer. This is the first time that I've been at an all-day hay, so to be on stage here in front of you all is honestly a privilege for me, and I hope you find the next 45 minutes or so interesting and engaging. So, what is this session about? Now, I imagine right now, aside from the fact that you're probably looking forward to that drink, you're also probably feeling pretty excited and inspired by all of the amazing speakers that have come before me onto this stage. And you're probably full of lots of ideas of things that you want to go and try and do. And you're thinking, you know what, I can't wait to get back into my craft. Can't wait to go and try this and think about how what I've learned today can be applied to what I do in my day in and day out. However, this talk is going to ask you to pause for a moment. Pause and reflect for a moment. And what I talk about is going to be applicable to both your craft, your work, but also your personal life. It'll really be up to you what you choose to take from this session. But I'm quite confident that you'll be able to apply that to all aspects of life. And it won't matter whether you're a researcher, a designer, product manager, a developer, analyst, whatever role you do, I think the content will be applicable to you in many respects. So, let's see if I can be a good enough reason to stand between you and that drink at the social. The mystery of life isn't a problem to solve, but a reality to experience. Mystery compels us to find answers. But sometimes I catch myself wondering whether we have chosen to neglect the greatest mystery of all. So let me ask you, how well do you know yourself? What is your purpose? What are you trying to achieve? What's driving you from one moment to the next? Have we as a society and as a design and tech space made our work and lives a series of checklists, a series of puzzles to overcome, perhaps obstacles, instead of taking the time to experience our reality? Now, I've asked you a couple of questions. It's only fair that I share a little bit about myself. So over the next few minutes, I'm going to tell you a little bit more about who I am. I'm going to start with a story. And this is an incident, quite a bizarre incident, a pivotal kind of moment in my life that took place when I was 7 years old. It's centered around a baseball cap, not too different from the baseball cap that I'm wearing at the moment. I was effectively blamed for something that I didn't do. I was blamed for flushing a baseball cap down the school toilet, which is what every 7-year-old at some point gets blamed for, right? Now, for the record, I mean, before I even say anything about the record, I mean, I don't even know if it's possible to flush a baseball cap down a toilet. And I don't know, because actually, for the record, I didn't do it. Honestly, I didn't do it. I knew nothing of this. And actually, now I think of it, I probably should have experimented to find out if you can flush that cap down the toilet. But anyway, maybe that's a separate talk and a separate story. But the point I'm trying to make is that I never did it. That's it. So anyway, I got blamed for this. And it basically resulted in me, I had to sit in the school hall for probably the best part of a month, every lunchtime, every break time, because apparently there was a witness. Someone saw me do this thing that I'm not even sure is possible to do. So I spent the best part of a month sat in the school hall on my own with nothing other than my thoughts. And I remember sitting there every day, every break time, every lunchtime. I remember sitting there thinking to myself, how do I fix this? How do I make this better? How do I get out of this situation that I'm in? I didn't ask for this. I remember thinking to myself, how do I remove this stain that's been put upon my reputation at school with all of the teachers? I remember my parents asking me if I did actually do what I was accused of. I remember the trust in their eyes when I said no. I remember my parents giving me advice and saying to me, you know what, maybe you can't fix this situation. Maybe we can't fix it. And I think that's what I learned from this experience. Even though this happened when I was 7 years old, it still feels like this vivid memory that I don't think I can ever forget. And what I learned was that you can't fix everything. There isn't a solution to everything. In design and tech, we've been taught that we can find a solution to everything, and sometimes that isn't the case. And when it comes to life experiences, there isn't always a solution, but we can sometimes come to terms with that experience. Now, this idea of coming to terms with an experience, I believe this drew me to art at a young age. Art is all about looking inwards. It's about introspection. It's about looking at the world inside ourselves, reviewing it. This piece of art that you can see on screen at the moment is by Frank Auerbach. It's a reflection of the struggle he experienced after World War II. Maybe you can see some of that struggle in the way that the artwork has been crafted. Now, when we struggle in life, we need a helping hand. We need someone to help us along, give us advice, perhaps. And like many parents, my parents gave me advice when I was growing up. But like any kid, some of that advice I took, some of it I ignored, some of it I didn't understand, and some of it I forgot. But there's one particular piece of advice that has stayed with me and will always stay with me. These words that you can see on screen are my dad's words. Having more time doesn't mean you should do more. Now, I'll be honest with you. My dad used to say this a lot, and I never really fully grasped what these words meant or how I felt about them, or if they even made sense to me. That was until 2008, when my dad died And suddenly, I was filled with all sorts of feelings. And the worst feeling was this sense of loss and this sense of running out of time. Not having enough time with another person. Something out of my control, something that I couldn't fix. Something that I couldn't go back in time and change. The reality is that time is always working against us. You know, when we're going through something in our lives that we really enjoy and, we're really happy, time seems to move really quickly. It's almost like time is against us. And when we're going through a painful experience, when we want that experience to be over and done with, when you don't want to be sat in that school hall every single day on your own, when you don't want to feel the pain of losing someone that you love, time seems to slow down. And everything just seems to take longer. We spend most of our lives chasing this clock, trying to fit in as many different things as we can. Every single day is a race. Every single day we're trying to do more. And we get to the end of the day, and then we look at our lists, and we haven't quite ticked everything off. Maybe we haven't ticked off the things that we should have ticked off. Maybe it's because our calendars look like this. Hands up if you've ever had your calendar look like this. I mean, it's kind of scary that there's a lot of hands going up. For the record, this is not my calendar. Mine is worse, a lot worse. You see these gaps? I don't have any gaps at all. Every week, unfortunately. But, this is the life that we live. This is how we create work. We don't have time. And when it comes to releasing products, I'm sure many of you will be familiar with a product release roadmap that looks like this. When is there time to stop? You release a version of your product or your service, and then immediately you move to the next iteration, the next version. There's no time to stop because we've got really big strategic objectives. We want to change the world. We want to do this, that, and the other. So it's just one release after the other. We also have these lovely devices in our pockets that are always asking us to do more, always giving us notifications, disturbing us. We saw this morning when Sophie was disturbed by her notification. She handled it with grace, something I can tell you I wouldn't have been able to do, so let's pray it doesn't happen to me. But these notifications, they don't care what we're doing, whether we're on a stage, whether we need a moment to ourselves. They're constantly distracting us. We also have these lovely devices on our wrists. They're also asking us to do more. More notifications, more things to look at, more to fill your time with, and yet we don't have enough time. Apparently this is the future of cars, although I wonder if this is the present state of cars. I find this fascinating. Cars were designed to help us get from point A to point B safely, and yet cars have started to turn into something else, asking us to do a lot more than just driving safely. And when I think about all of this, when I reflect on all of these things, I start to make sense of my dad's words. I start to make sense of my feelings towards those words. We live in a distracted world, too busy trying to solve life, too busy trying to solve work instead of simply experiencing it. Sadly, science is against us. This is some fascinating research. And what it shows is that as we get older, it becomes harder and harder for us to introduce change into our habits in response to experiences. Now, this is very personal for me because this dashed line that you can see in the middle is me. I'm almost 40 and I'm fighting against this every single day. Because for almost 40 years, I've built up habits. My brain works in a way where it just wants to rely on those habits. And I have to fight against this. If we think about design and tech for a moment, I'm sure you'll agree there's a lot of pressure. You know, this morning we've heard amazing talks around the changes in technology and the different options we have. And technology is always changing. You know, design is always changing. You know, there's new processes, new tools, new ways of working, new ways of collaborating. You know, today we're using Figma. Tomorrow, who knows, we might go back to Photoshop. You know, you don't know what's going to happen next. And there's this constant pressure for us to keep learning. We must stay on the cusp of whatever's changing out there. We can't get left behind. We have to constantly keep learning new things. And if you do kind of like pause for a moment, then good old imposter syndrome kicks in. We start panicking, thinking, are we good enough? Are we capable enough? But what if we got it wrong? Now, I'm not saying that learning Figma and different types of tools and technologies is wrong. But what if, in our pursuit of learning everything in our external world, we forgot to learn from one of the most important sources of knowledge? Aristotle said, knowing yourself is the beginning of all wisdom. Let me explain more. So, can anybody tell me what this is that you can see on screen? Anybody familiar with it? Any guesses? Empathy map. Thank you. So if you work in design, in technology, you will have seen this. It's an empathy map. We tend to use this to practice empathy for the end user. Practice empathy for the end user so we can understand what they want from a product and service, understand what their needs are, understand what they're thinking, what's driving them from one moment to the next. But practicing empathy is hard work. Trying to imagine what another person is thinking and feeling and what they need is really, really hard work. And if we can't practice empathy for ourselves, how can we possibly practice it for other people that we're designing and building products and services for? The first step to empathy is self-empathy. We have to learn to understand ourselves first before we even begin to understand other people. If we're not prepared to have that courage to look at the world inside ourselves, how can we possibly even look out there at other people, the worlds that they're living in, and the turmoil that they're possibly experiencing? This is where reflection can help. Reflection is all about self-awareness. It's not about finding solutions or fixing things. It's about experiencing life, understanding life, understanding the things that we do and why we do them. It's ultimately about learning through experience. Now, the best way to visualize reflection is to see it as a continuous cycle. So when you experience something, instead of just trying to do more or to go back and repeat that same experience in the same way that you did before, you take time to stop, to pause, to actually not do more and to do less, and reflect on that experience, understand it, process your feelings about that experience, what it means to you, how you reacted to the words of another person, how you responded to the needs of another person. When you reflect, you find opportunities to learn about yourself, other people, your environment. And then you take what you learn and you apply that into the next iteration of that experience. Now, there's a lot of research out there. I'm going to quote this research because it shows that when people do reflect, when they take that time to stop for a moment and pause life, instead of just continuously doing more, they're happier, they're more productive, they're less burnt out. So let's just pause there for a second and think about that. So people who do less, people who are willing to stop and think about the experiences that they're having, are more productive, they're happier, and less burnt out. If you look around the world at people that either at the moment are on top of their game, their profession, their craft, or have been in the past, people like Brené Brown, Serena Williams, Lionel Messi, you will see that they have a track record of embracing reflection, embracing the idea of downtime. Our industry doesn't afford us downtime. Our industry demands that we just keep going. There's no such thing as downtime. But actually, a lot of people recognize that to really excel at what you do, to be happy, to feel fulfilled, to make informed choices about your life, it's not a case of just doing as much as you can. It's not just a case of cramming in as many things as you can into a day. It's actually the reverse. It's about doing less. Now, when we reflect on an experience, we're looking for something very specific. We're looking for meaning. I love this quote. We had the experience but missed the meaning. If we experience something and never take the time to make sense of it, to process everything around that experience, then that experience and our time with it has almost been pointless. Now, back in the 80s, there was a lot of research going on with reflection and how we can use reflective practice to learn and grow and prosper, especially in the teaching space, in the teaching environment, and in education. Graham Gibbs was a professor at the time at Oxford University, and he came up with a 6-stage reflective cycle to help you practice reflection. Now, one unique thing that Gibbs did that other people at the time doing similar research didn't do was place value on feelings. We heard this morning Helendi talk about feelings and the importance of feelings, and the fact that in our society we sometimes disregard them. We sometimes see them as a sign of weakness. But they're not. Feelings are a sign of courage, and feelings are critical to reflection. They're a key component of reflection. It's actually feelings that help us find meaning in experiences. How someone makes you feel is very hard to forget. How I make you feel in this session will determine what kind of meaning you apply to this session and what you take away from it. Sometimes we remember the words that people say. Sometimes we forget them. But how someone makes you feel is very hard to forget. And that's why feelings are so important to reflection and so important to defining meaning to our experiences. Now, when I work with my teams at Co-op, one of the things I try to do is create the space for the teams to reflect on their experiences. We try and avoid doing traditional retros and instead try and find different ways to reflect and to really reflect on our feelings to help develop our emotional intelligence. And I feel really proud of the teams that I work with. They embrace the activities that we do. This is a photograph from a couple of weeks back when we met up and we basically reflected on the past quarter as a team. And this is the team just taking time to think about things. And I can see in this team the recognition that actually having that time where we're in an office together and we're not actually looking at Slack and we're not thinking about what we're going to design next or what we're going to build next. We're actually processing our experiences and thinking about the things that made us feel good, not so good, and thinking about what we can learn from all of that and how we can take those learnings forward. So where do you start? Where do you begin with reflection? So the first thing you need to understand is that reflection is a form of art. Reflection is a form of art. These are the key components you need in order to successfully create art. Solitude, a curious mindset, and imagination. These are also the same components that you need to successfully reflect. So what I'd like to do now is just to dig into these components and share with you my experience of why they're important and how you can use them. So, first component, solitude. I feel like in society we tend to reject solitude or apply negative connotations to solitude. But actually, when we spend time alone without distractions, without other people, without our phones and notifications, our mind is stimulated in different ways. And reflection demands that we create the space for ourselves so that we can be alone, so that we can slow down, so that we can pause, so that we can stop, so that we can process everything that's going on, instead of just flying through everything, experiencing it and feeling like we're being dragged through everything. Now, when you do reflect, when you do take this time to be alone, what you're trying to do is allow your thoughts to be processed so that you can make sense of them. And the best way I can describe this idea of processing your thoughts is to imagine your thoughts being leaves that are falling from a tree. You need to let these leaves fall where they need to fall. You need to see where they land and what meaning you take from where they've landed. Now, a practical tip that I'll share with you that can help you get started with this quite easily, quite quickly, is to say, you know what, I'm only going to dedicate 15 minutes each day to have this alone time. Just 15 minutes. Now, maybe you can't do it every day. Maybe you do it once a week. You start however you want to. But 15 minutes a day where you say to yourself, I don't want any distractions. I'm going to leave my phone, my watch, whatever other distractions you have in a different room, different space. It's going to be me and my thoughts alone. And just starting with 15 minutes will give you that space to process your thoughts. Second component, curiosity. Now, in theory, we're designers, developers, product managers, analysts, researchers. We're in this industry, in this space, because we're curious. We want to know more. We want to know how we can make the world and products and services better. So in theory, we should be good at this. The reason you need a curious mindset for reflection is because you want to dig past the obvious actions and behaviors in a given experience. So when you reflect on one of your past experiences, the most obvious things will be the actions you took, your own behavior, the behavior of other people, the actions other people took. But you want to dig past all of that. You want to dig into any emotions that were driving your actions. And you want to keep digging through those layers until you get into the very belief system that's driving you in those moments to do and say the things that you do and say. But how do you do this? How do you dig through these layers? So a practical tip for you, keep a journal. When you have that time to reflect, when you have those 15 minutes of alone time, get yourself a journal and start asking yourself questions about whatever experience you're reflecting on. Start asking yourself questions, write those questions down, and write the answers down as well. How did something make you feel? Why did you do this? How did you respond to such and such situation? This will really help you process your thoughts. And this is where you'll start to see the first signs of meaning behind the experience that you're reflecting on. You'll start to make sense of your own feelings towards that experience. Now, the last component of reflection is imagination. Imagination is really important because reflection isn't simply about remembering what has come before and writing it down and asking questions about it. The purpose of reflection is for us to learn from the knowledge that we have inside ourselves, from the experiences that we have. And the way we can learn through reflection is by imagining different situations, different responses to experiences. This imagination is key because we don't want to simply imagine. We want to separate ourselves from our thoughts. We want to see them as two separate entities so that we're observing our thoughts very objectively. If you're interested in learning more about this, there's a great theory called the self-awareness theory, and it is about separating yourself from your thoughts, your feelings, and almost treating them as somebody else's so that you're more easily able to review them. I'd suggest looking into that theory. But a practical tip to help you with this is, if you're writing in your journal questions and answers as you reflected on your experience, don't simply go and read your journal. Instead, iterate on those answers. Because if you go back to something that you wrote 2 days ago, your feelings might have changed. Your perspective might have changed. There might be some new insight that you've gained that changes what you think about it. But by iterating on those thoughts, by iterating on some of the answers to those questions, you start to lay that foundation to help you think and imagine how you might react differently, how you might do things differently. And this is that key step. Because if we never reflect, we just keep doing everything in the same way that we've always done it. Remember, science is against us. And this process of imagination and thinking about things in different ways can really, really help us learn and hopefully apply what we learn into future experiences. Now, there's a lot to take in on this slide, but I'm going to talk you through it, so bear with me. When I zoom out of reflection, obviously we've just talked about the different components in reflection. I've dug into those and shared with you my personal experience and tips. But when I zoom out of reflection, the way I see reflection is something that takes courage from us. It's like practicing empathy. It demands courage from us. We need to give something to reflection. If we give it something, we'll get something back. And there's practical inputs that we give reflection, and there's practical outputs that reflection will give us. And what you see here is very personal. So this is me telling you what I feel I get out of reflection. So for example, when you have that alone time and you have 15 minutes of thinking time, and you're sat just with your thoughts, no distractions, you start to slow everything down. You start to process things. And when you build yourself a curious mindset, and you start journaling and writing questions and answering questions, you start to find meaning in experiences. And when you start to imagine, when you start to iterate on those answers that you wrote maybe a couple of days ago, you start to learn. You start to imagine different futures. You start to imagine scenarios in how you can do things differently. Now, at this stage, you might be thinking, how does this help me in design or research or product, or, as an engineer, how can this help me? Well, again, I can only really share with you my personal experience. Here are some of the things that I feel I gain from reflection. And this slide basically illustrates what I gain from reflection and how those gains have helped me with my craft. I'm a designer. I've loved designing my whole life. Being creative is something that I just always need. And I honestly believe that reflection, which perhaps due to my childhood experiences is now almost a part of my identity, reflection has really helped me evolve my craft and really think about where I want to go. So for example, one thing I gain from reflection is self-awareness. Self-awareness is really important to me because I'm not perfect. Nobody is. But self-awareness helps me understand the impact that I can have on other people. Both the good impact and also the not so great impact. That self-awareness really helps me understand what impact I can have on my teams, how my decision-making can change how my team are feeling. I also gain from reflection a deeper alignment to my core values, the things that I believe in, the reason why I do what I do, the reason why I'm on this stage today. And that deeper alignment with my core values allows me to be really selective with what I do. I end up saying no quite a lot. And often friends and colleagues will say to me, Imran, you're missing out on this, you should do it. And they say things like that because they care about me and they want me involved. But I'm very selective with what I do because I know what aligns to my values and my core purpose that I deem, in my opinion, my purpose in this life. I also think from reflection, I've gained almost this mindset that helps me see situations in different ways. So if you take that situation, that bizarre situation of flushing a baseball cap down a school toilet, which again, for the record, I didn't do, there's different ways of looking at that situation. And as time has passed, my interpretation has changed, and I'm not sure if I'll ever settle on an interpretation. But what I love about that experience, and the reason I embrace it and enjoy speaking about it in a happy, kind of like joyful way, even though at the time it was a terrible thing to go through, is because there's so many different ways of looking at that experience. So many different ways of interpreting what happened and why it happened, and how it shaped me, and how it changed me, and how it allowed me to learn. And this, this gain for me has really helped me in design, because it allows me to see things from different perspectives. It allows me to look at a piece of design and really almost practice empathy for different people and try and imagine different people using a piece of design. It helps me with collaboration with teams. Some teams find it easy to collaborate, some don't. And I just feel like through reflection, I have this view where I'm able to see situations in a different way. And I'm able to see that actually there isn't always a solution to everything. Sometimes there isn't a fix for everything in life. You can't just apply a dogmatic process of view to everything and then everything's going to be okay. We have to be prepared to experiment. We have to be prepared to be wrong. And being able to see situations in different ways is a critical step in that process. And the last area that I'll highlight for you, practicing of empathy. One thing that we do a lot at Co-op in my teams is we iterate on work. We never settle for creating something and just thinking that's it, we're done. We're constantly, relentlessly trying to iterate on work, make refinements. And I feel like I've gained that ability and that passion for iteration from reflection. As a principal designer, I don't do as much hands-on in my current role, hands-on designing rather, I should say. But when I did, that was the most enjoyable part of the role, designing something and thinking it's good and it works and it's usable. But then to come back to it the next day and think, what if someone used it like this, and start iterating on it? And I would do this for hours and days. I'd keep repeating this process and I'd never get tired of it. I just loved looking at things in different ways. And this talk, for example, I can promise you, if you come and see me do this talk at a future event in a couple of years, it won't be the same talk, because I'll be going home tonight thinking of ways in which I can iterate on it. And I don't know, for me, this comes from reflection and being able to see things from different perspectives. And it's not that I've perfected it. Like I said to you at the start, I'm constantly fighting against the urge to just keep doing things the same way, because it's easier, it's simpler. But reflection helps me see that there is another way. So I've shared a lot with you around reflection, the benefits of it, why I do it, how I do it, and what I gain from it. But it's important that we understand what happens when we don't reflect. What do we risk by not reflecting? I'm going to go back to the words of Frank Herbert. You cannot see the future without seeing the past. Reflection is our only means of slowing down time. Our only means of connecting the past and future together. Our only means to travel back in time, to observe our thoughts, our experiences, the words said, the feelings felt, and to understand them, to make sense of them, and to use them as a springboard for growth. And it's growth that we harm when we don't reflect. Our personal growth and the impact of our potential growth on the world around us. So I'm going to sum up now for you everything that I've talked about and wrap this session up. You can get yourself that drink that you've been looking forward to. So in the design and tech space, I think it's fair to say our job, our role is to make the world a better place, to make the world a simpler, more accessible, more inclusive place. To take teams and organizations on a journey to transform them, to transform products and services. Perhaps, if we're fortunate enough, maybe even transform lives. But this journey begins with you. It doesn't begin with someone else. It doesn't begin with the user. The greatest mystery of all is not something out there. Instead, it's inside you, and it's inside me. When we take the time to reflect, we start to understand our strengths, our weaknesses, our unique abilities. We start to recognize our passions, the values that are driving us, our ambitions. This makes us resilient, but it also gives us clarity of thought. It helps us understand who we are and who we want to be. And through this self-knowledge, we can start making informed decisions about the kind of life we want to live and the work that we want to create. And meaningful change, I think it's fair to say, is what we're all looking for. That's why we're designers, researchers, product managers, analysts, developers, engineers. We're trying to create meaningful change. Any form of learning that we do should lead to change. Change inside us, and change in the way that we do things. So let me ask you again. How well do you know yourself? What is your purpose? What are you going to take from this conference today into your tomorrow? In this industry and in this world, what is your role going to be in making this world a better place for everyone? Maybe the art of reflection can help you define what that change needs to be. Because change begins with you. Thank you for listening to me.